Around 73 BC, Spartacus and 200 other gladiators decided to escape. But during their attempt, they were found out, which forced them to fight. The story goes that, lacking conventional weapons such as swords and spears, they used everything they had available in the kitchen, such as knives and skewers. Some 70 of the 200 men managed to break out, and to protect themselves, they packed a suitable number of gladiators' weapons and armor. They were now free, but there was no time to celebrate, as the Republic would hunt them down. The men decided to act. One of their first steps was to select their leaders. 3 people were selected, 2 of whom were former Gaulish slaves called Crixus and Onimus, as well as Spartacus himself. Using their improvised weapons and fighting abilities, the fugitive gladiators succeeded in persuading the guards at the city gates not to stand in their way. It's a bit difficult to say for sure what happened from that point on, as the sources are fairly vague and imprecise. Spartacus and his men are believed to have fought and defeated some soldiers who were sent to stop their escape. After this triumph, his group looted and pillaged some places in the Capua region. Later on, knowing that 70 men could never survive for long against the gigantic Roman troops, Spartacus allegedly tried to recruit even more soldiers for his group while he was in Capua. Once he had succeeded in this, he ordered his troops to withdraw from there, heading for Mount Vesuvius, where they took up position. Reports of Spartacus's escape quickly spread, drawing in a growing number of slaves who would rather live as fugitives than be held captive by the Romans. These new recruits comprised both slaves born in captivity and soldiers taken during Rome's many wars. Rome then decided to respond resolutely to this uprising. There were several reasons for that. Firstly, they hoped to contain the criminal and rebellious behavior of Spartacus's men. But they also had another motivation. Spartacus's attacks took place in the Campania region, a location that Rome's wealthy and powerful loved to spend their vacations and leisure time in. On top of that, the area was crowded with properties owned by the most diverse Republic authorities, which made them want to quickly ditch anything that could hinder their leisure. The decision was made to crush Spartacus's revolt swiftly. To do so, the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber was told to gather troops to fight the rebellious gladiators. But Gaius Claudius did not succeed in assembling the regular legions that routinely fought for the Republic. Instead, he put together a mixture of militiamen and other inexperienced men. Although his soldiers were not Rome's best, they were numerous, numbering 3,000 men. They headed for Mount Vesuvius, where Spartacus and his men had positioned themselves. However, believing that these slaves would not be worth the risk of losing his troops unnecessarily, Gaius Claudius adopted a more conservative plan. He ordered his men to obstruct the only known way down the mountain, to prevent the insurgents led by Spartacus from escaping or obtaining supplies. He then basically decided to wait it out, hoping that hunger and a lack of resources would soon cause his enemies to capitulate. But Gaius Claudius quickly found out that he had underestimated his opponents. He was not wrong in believing that the men led by Spartacus lacked sophisticated and up-to-date training. But, to offset this shortcoming, the men had many other cards up their sleeves, including their resourcefulness and shrewdness. They hatched an ingenious plan. With Claudius believing that they would starve to death before long, Spartacus's men were free to move. To overcome the siege, Spartacus and his men made ropes and ladders out of vines and trees growing on the slopes of Vesuvius. These materials were used to build a kind of improvised abseil, allowing them to descend the mountainside, setting themselves up on a side that Claudius's troops had left unguarded, as they believed that no one would be able to move around Vesuvius, except along the route that they controlled. Spartacus's troops then managed to get around the mountain, and, in rapid movements, outflanked Claudius's men, who, utterly astonished and stunned by the gladiators' feat, were defeated quite easily. Spartacus had achieved a tremendous victory. After years of slavery, he had finally struck a blow against the Romans. As for the pretentious Claudius, we don't know exactly what happened to him. After the battle at Vesuvius, he was never mentioned again in Roman records. There are two possibilities. He either died in battle, which is the most likely scenario, or he managed to escape and was then deemed irrelevant enough to be mentioned. Spartacus's achievement meant that he could equip his men with Roman military gear, while attracting a growing number of escapees to join him. His success, however, had consequences. As his fame spread, more people joined Spartacus's cause, heightening the need to undertake ever more daring incursions to support his followers. Although Italy had less than 10,000 gladiators in total, Spartacus was leading an impressive 40,000-strong army by the end of 73 BC. This group's rapacious antics drew an increasingly violent response from the Romans, unwilling to let the threat of slaves go unchecked. Spartacus mainly aimed his attacks at lands inhabited by hopeless slaves or impoverished peasants who had lost everything. As he made his way through the cities, the underprivileged would welcome him with open arms, joining in the plundering of their oppressors' wealth. The rightful distribution of the spoils by Spartacus helped with recruitment, strengthening his ranks even more. After Claudius and his men were defeated on Mount Vesuvius, another praetor was appointed to tackle the troubles instigated by Spartacus. The chosen one this time was Publius Varinius, who brought with him two trusted men, Furius and Cosinius. Plutarch noted that Varinius chose to divide his forces, placing around 2,000 men under Furius's command. Like the previous attempt led by Claudius, Varinius believed he would have little trouble disposing of those slaves. And also like his predecessor, his fate was not entirely pleasant. Spartacus's men inflicted another humiliating defeat on the Romans, killing Cosinius and narrowly capturing Varinius. To top it off, they managed to secure a considerable amount of military equipment from the beaten Romans, with Spartacus donning the robes of a Roman magistrate. Spartacus and his troops managed to enlist even more men in their group after this triumph, and their fame grew. That small ragtag group of 70 men, who had escaped from a gladiator school in Capua, turned into an army of more than 70,000 warriors, ready to follow Spartacus and march on Rome. The year was already too advanced for any attempt to cross the Alps. Spartacus decided to head south, looking to establish his rule in the Lucania and Bruttium regions. To bolster his army, Spartacus banned gold and silver from entering the cities he controlled. But he did encourage iron imports and sought out skilled blacksmiths to make weapons and armor for his new recruits. Spartacus's objective was to return to the north no longer as a gang, but as a powerful army. As his power grew, he became an ever more severe problem for the Romans. They doubled down and dispatched a large army to counter this rebellion. But this is a story for a later video in this series. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.